In March 2009, just a stone's throw from this high street, a murder took place that was to shock the nation and baffle the police.
I'm dealing with a horrific murder here. I need the public's help to help me identify who the victim is.
This was possibly the first case when I had really sat back and thought, this is disgusting. It's actually almost impossible to listen to.
What followed was an investigation across 2 counties with more than 100 police officers involved.
I've never come across an investigation as unique or as gruesome, really, as this.
And as the investigation progressed, a team of scientists would make some startling discoveries about the nature of the crime.
Fibres have actually got onto the tapes at the time he's wrapped the items. And what he's actually done is he's sealed the evidence in himself.
Every murder is in some way horrific or traumatic. This one had a very different element to it. It's the calculating coldness of it, but it's the skill as well that is really quite chilling.
This is the story of how police pieced together evidence to solve the mystery of the Jigsaw murder. Southgate, a suburban residential area on the outskirts of North London. It was here that Geoffrey Howe, a 49-year-old kitchen salesman, lived. Just behind these gates is the 2-bedroom flat Geoffrey shared with a couple of tenants. His family described him as a jovial, charming character who had a heart of gold, but it was perhaps his good nature that would eventually lead to his demise. In early March 2009, he vanished from here without a trace. Geoffrey Howe was reported missing on the 16th of March by a friend. But it wasn't until a week later that a gruesome discovery 30 miles away set in motion one of the most grisly police investigations the nation has ever seen. Roger Kingsley's a farmer who's lived in the area all his life. He works on his family's farm. On the 22nd of March 2009, he was going about his daily routine. But with over 500 acres to cover, it's often several days between visits to any particular field.
It was about 7:30 in the morning when I started cultivating the field with the tractor. I noticed a bag at the bottom of the field. It stuck out, so it was quite noticeable. And I thought, well, I'll pick that up at some point in the day, as it'll only get caught up when we're hedge cutting or trimming the banks and one thing or another. And I didn't think anything more of it until later on in the afternoon, when I actually got a bit closer to it. And I stopped the tractor, jumped off with the dogs to have a look. I found the object just the other side of this fence here. It, to me, had looked as though it had been placed, not thrown. It was in a green holdall, and then when I unzipped it, the object was wrapped in blue builder's plastic. And it was at that point I just touched it with my finger, and it actually squidged in, for want of a better word. And that's when I got a bit suspicious in the fact that it could be something that a bit untoward.
Roger called the local police, who sent a team of officers to meet him at the field.
When the police came out, I was here on the site to show them where the bag actually was. The police officers approached it, looked at it. One of them bent down, undone the bag, and saw the blue plastic inside. And then he had a bit of a feel around inside and looked up to his colleague and said, "I think it's got toes on." Well, I'm pretty sure that's what he said, and I'll never forget that. And they realised then that it was something very suspicious. Once they realised what was in the bag, they shut the road off, shut the village off, more or less, for that night and the next morning.
Roger had found what turned out to be a human left leg, just close to a lay-by on the A507. But there was nothing else suspicious at the scene. The case was being handled by officers from the Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire Major Crime Unit, based here at police headquarters in Welwyn Garden City. But at first, they didn't know what they were dealing with.
What was unusual about it was the skill in which the leg had been removed from the body. We had a specialist Home Office pathologist and an anthropologist to actually give us an informed view as to whether it was a medical amputation or not. But because there was no cauterisation of blood veins and arteries, then there was no indication that it was a medical amputation. So we could rule that out. If we could rule that out, then quite clearly it was a murder inquiry.
Operation Abnet was launched, but the key to finding the perpetrator would be identifying the victim.
The vast majority of people who commit murder somebody that they know. That's a brutal fact of life, unfortunately. So if we could build up a really clear picture and identify who our victim was, that surely would give us a number of lines of inquiry to identify who the offenders were. But because the victim's details weren't on the DNA database, because they'd had no history of involvement with the police in any way, shape or form, it didn't help us in actually identifying who that one victim was.
The police were making slow progress, but over the next few weeks, members of the public would make further discoveries that helped unravel the mystery, which was baffling both the investigating team and forensic experts, especially when a human head was discovered.
It is a head with a face that has been removed. There are no eyes, there is no nose, there is no mouth, there is no tongue, there are no ears. It is an anatomical dissection, a fresh anatomical dissection.
After the discovery of a human left leg in a lay-by in Cottered, Hertfordshire in March 2009, a murder investigation, Operation Abnet, was launched. With just one gruesome discovery made by a member of the public, police were baffled.
It begged belief to start with, to think what is there behind this murder, what is the motive for this murder?
And a week later, on March the 29th, there was a second discovery. A passerby found a left forearm discarded on a quiet country road in Wheathampstead. Almost 25 miles from the Cottered site, the key question was, were the two body parts related?
It's extremely rare for body parts to be distributed and then to be found in the way that it has in this case. Of course, a concern to me was, are we talking about one victim or are we talking about a number of victims? And it was only after the discovery of the body parts that we could then carry out forensic testing to compare DNA between the body parts to confirm that we were in fact talking about one victim.
The police began looking into missing persons records, but without being able to identify the age, ethnicity or even gender from the body parts, it was proving difficult. With no identity, there was no obvious motive, and the absence of even a murder scene left police with very little to go on. But while inquiries were taking place here in Hertfordshire, the case was about to open up on a much wider scale with a new discovery almost 100 miles north in Leicestershire.
Well, what happened in this case was there had been two separate body parts found in Hertfordshire on, I think it was the 22nd of March and the 29th of March. On the 31st of March 2009, a Tuesday, there was the discovery of a human head in a field in Asfordby near Melton Mowbray.
Officers began a painstaking search of the area, looking for further evidence around where the head had been found.
At the time of that being discovered, we didn't know whether that was linked to the Hertfordshire discoveries or not. So, whilst we made initial contact with Hertfordshire, what we couldn't afford to do was to assume that this was the same victim, because it could have been more than one victim.
As soon as the head was discovered up in Leicestershire, officers from Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire Major Crime Unit travelled to Leicestershire to determine then who was going to be responsible for which part of the inquiry.
The discovery of the head was on the Tuesday lunchtime. I had confirmation that there was a match to the Hertfordshire body parts on the Thursday lunchtime, so it took 2 days to actually confirm through DNA that it was the same victim.
In any investigation like this, you've got one chance of getting it right, so you need to make sure that the processes and mechanisms that you're setting up are going to work, that you're not missing anything and you're not duplicating effort. And it was getting that strategy, working with Leicestershire, that really put the investigation on sound footing.
The head was found by a farmer who was digging in his field, and we believe the offenders had got out of the vehicle and discarded it in woodland that was next to the field, and we believe that it was probably carried into the field, into the open, by animals.
The police had now got 3 body parts, all confirmed as the same victim through DNA testing, but they were still no closer to identifying a victim. And the state of the head, which had been found, didn't help them. Much of the skin and soft tissue had been removed, and police weren't even sure whether it belonged to a man or a woman. They called in the help of Sue Black and the forensic anthropology team at the University of Dundee's Centre for Anatomy and Human Identification.
They sent a photograph of the head to us because they had another missing person, not in the vicinity, but geographically fairly close. And what they wanted to know is, could this be this individual? We're looking for a young adult female. Could this head belong to a young adult female? So we received the photographs, we looked at it and we went, no, this is not your young adult female. This is somebody else. This looks to us like a middle-aged male.
The image is too horrific to broadcast.
You could never have shown that image, and it's certainly not an image that I would ever show, because it is not a pleasant image. It is a head with a face that has been removed. There are no eyes, there is no nose, there is no mouth, there is no tongue, there are no ears. It is an anatomical dissection, a fresh anatomical dissection. That is not pleasant for anybody to have to deal with.
But that unpleasant task fell to Sue and her colleague Lucina Hackman.
Our first thought when we looked at the head was that there was no soft tissue and there was no evidence of decomposition, so we had to look at another method of loss of soft tissue in this situation. So we asked ourselves if it may have been animals that had found the head and removed the soft tissue, but there were quite obviously no bite marks or any marks left by any animal activity.
If this isn't animal activity, then it must be human intervention. If this is human intervention, then we predict we will find cut marks here, here, and here.
The soft tissue had been removed from the head using a sharp implement, and it had been very skillfully cut where the muscles attached to the bone.
That was a confirmation to us that we were really looking at a detailed, not just dismemberment, but a disfigurement in relation to the head.
Interestingly, in this situation, the teeth were all left intact, which surprised us because the teeth are very commonly used as a method of identification.
This is the CT scan of the skull, but even with the teeth intact, without any clue as to who the victim was, there were no dental records to compare them with, and the search for an identity continued. The police and forensics experts were working with what had been recovered so far. To date, only a left leg, left forearm and head had been unearthed. But a week later, 2 further body parts were found in quick succession. On the 7th of April, a right leg was discovered in Puckeridge in Hertfordshire, and just a few days later, a suitcase containing a torso was recovered 3 miles south. The new discoveries had the same DNA as the rest, and the torso provided police with some key evidence.
We can now confirm the cause of death, which was a stab wound to the back. The man is to be believed to be of white, Asian or of mixed heritage, between the heights of 5'6" and 5'10".
Detective Superintendent Michael Hanlon decided to change tack using media exposure in the